Hello, in this video I decided to react to PaxTube's video about the French Revolution, and up until this point we actually agree about pretty much everything. So he explains that the original goal of the French Revolution was just to establish a constitutional monarchy, and it was also this principle, one man, one vote, and not this idea that feudal lords and the clergy had two votes and that the rest of the country, the citizens, like 95% of the country, or some even say 98% of the country, had also one vote, and they would always get outvoted by the clergy and the feudal lords because of this. But up until the Jacobins took power, the point of the French Revolution was not to kill the king and start with some more radical things that happened after the king was killed. But okay, I'll first let PaxTube speak, and then I will react about his take about the Jacobins.
In August, the king was arrested and the monarchy was abolished a month later in September. Over 1,000 years of French monarchy met its end. The armed, violent Parisian mob started to play a leading role in the revolution. The Republic had totally lost control of public order within Paris. The armed, working class of the city became known as the sans-culottes, and they made it their mission to dole out mob justice to any perceived enemies of revolutionary ideals. Radicals were all too happy to use these mobs for their own goals. Hundreds of political prisoners were massacred in their cells in what became known as the September Massacres. From here, the Jacobins, the most radical wing of the revolution, seized control of the government. Charged with treason, King Louis was executed in January 1793. Now, at this point it needs to be understood that many people who supported the original revolution did not support this new direction it was taking.
Yeah, I agree definitely with this part. So it is kind of interesting that leftist regimes and revolutionaries, now generally speaking, I'm generalizing, have a tendency to kill their own at a higher rate than fascist regimes and far-right regimes. Of course, Hitler also did, like the Night of the Long Knives, but okay, generally speaking, anti-revolutionary regimes or fascist regimes that in a way also have a revolution of their own to make, but in the backwards direction, as Francesco Franco said. But okay, why is it that leftist regimes have this weird tendency to slaughter like thousands of their own people? Well, I guess because the ideals of the leftist revolutions, generally speaking, throughout history were we want more equality and more freedom in a very abstract way. So, for example, even Stalin claimed that freedom of speech exists, but that it needs to be suspended sometimes in the Soviet Union, and that sometimes is really a very important detail to take note of. But yeah, or for example, the Jacobins were the first regime that proclaimed that every man can vote for the parliament. Every man, not just rich men like the Girondins before them had proclaimed, but that remained an abstract right because they centralized all the power in their own hands. But my point was, if you have freedom and equality as your ideal, then you can always demand more freedom and more equality and kill all those that disagree. While fascists, for example, if they want like a like just a strong leader in charge of a nation that's ethnically purged from minorities, then it's hard to like disagree about the way in which you're going to do this. It's a very simple thing, let's say, a very non-utopian simple thing that the fascist regimes wanted to establish, and there is not that much room for disagreement. That's my point. At least that's how I would try to explain why leftist regimes have this weird tendency to kill their own people, as it happened in the French Revolution as well. But okay, let us continue.
wanted France to be a constitutional monarchy, and they opposed anti-Catholic policies. But the revolution had now become like a freight train with no brakes. Moderate revolutionaries would soon join the nobility and church in persecution. In August 1793, France was still on the back foot in its war against Austria and Prussia. To turn the tide of the war, the government implemented military conscription for all French males aged 18 to 25. The law was one of the first of its kind in Europe. Now, imagine you're a French citizen who goes to church, liked the monarchy, and is now being conscripted to fight for the very government that's destroying both. That was the case for large sections of France, and as you would expect, revolts broke out. The largest rebellion was in the Vendée region, where the rebels scored many victories. The French government responded by forming the so-called Committee of Public Safety, which effectively combined the legislative, judicial, and executive branch into one body. It condemned to death anyone with, and I quote, strong presumptions of complicity with the enemies of liberty. If that sounds vague to you, it's because it is. The lawyer Maximilien Robespierre, who was now a leading member of the Jacobins, declared, "The revolution is the war of liberty against its enemies." This was the beginning of what has since been called the Reign of Terror. The National Convention confirmed this by literally voting for a resolution that declared terror is the order of the day. Anyone suspected of doubting the revolution or working with the enemy was arrested. I've seen some historians refer to the Committee of Public Safety as the world's first police state. One of the first to be executed under this policy was the former Duke of Orleans, Philippe. He was a Grand Master Freemason and had played a major role in aligning the nobility with the revolution. Ironically, he had even voted for his own cousin.
Okay, what's interesting about the Jacobins, they really are something like the 19th century communists. But okay, now I want to tell you how Isaac Deutscher and Erich Hobsbawm interpret these events. So, on some issues I disagree with both historians because they are Marxists, while I'm not, but I do think that their interpretation is valuable and it offers maybe a different perspective of the Jacobins. According to Erich Hobsbawm, what happens in revolutions general? It happened in the Soviet Revolution and it happened in the French Revolution. So what happens? There is a revolution. The country is then surrounded by countries that want to destroy the revolution. They don't want the ideology to spread. And in order to defeat the enemies from outside, the regime becomes tyrannical. And it begins to kind of centralize power in order to be effective on the battlefield. And history did show us that highly centralized entities are more successful on the battlefield than those that aren't. For example, that's why the communists in the Spanish Civil War were really good at killing the anarchists, who were very decentralized. But okay, so while the Jacobins were in many ways pretty horrible, they killed a bunch of innocent people, they did some very important things that one could say saved the revolution. So, as Pextube mentions, they are the first regime that implemented full mobilization. All adult males need to serve in the military and fight. Now, that I would argue was necessary if you want to win the war. Now, okay, it is true that many did not support the Jacobins, but many who maybe even disagreed with their crazy takes on religion, like their take was essentially now we are going to worship reason, which is self-contradictory even. Reason is not supposed to be worshipped. But many that just wanted France to be the most dominant power in Europe kind of wanted full mobilization, and that move did save the Jacobins from defeat. Like, you can clearly see that once full mobilization was implemented, the French Republic actually starts to win huge battles. And Erich Hobsbawm also actually in a very interesting way points to the fact that back at that time people did not realize that the 20th century is going to be really the century of full mobilization of this total form of war that the Jacobins waged on other countries. So in that aspect, Jacobins were ahead of their time and were very effective at saving the revolution and winning the war, which is what many French people wanted, who actually even despised the Jacobins, but they still wanted France to win over its enemies, like Great Britain, for example. Many historians kind of compare this struggle for dominance over Europe between France and Great Britain with Rome and the Carthaginians. Okay, so obviously Great Britain would be the Carthaginians and the French would be Rome, because they had a mighty land army, while the British were kind of undefeated on the seas. But okay, let us continue.
The king's death, and he also voted for the very policy he was now charged under. None of it saved him. He was guillotined within a few months. As for the rebellion in Vendée, it saw some successes and drained the government of key resources. However, it was eventually put down through brutal pacification tactics, where entire villages were destroyed. The revolutionary government showed no mercy. It's estimated that over 100,000 civilians of the region were killed. The revolutionary generals involved would later be executed for war crimes. When it was over, the government had won, but at the cost of writing one of the most shameful chapters of French history. For the Jacobins, liberty meant destroying anyone from the old order who stood in their way. If that meant absolutely brutal tyranny, then the ends justify the means. The revolution entered a stage of total lack of accountability for the central government. All problems could simply be blamed on counter-revolution and the old system. The Jacobins had a radical utopian vision for a future French society where reason and equality would reign. They believed the Enlightenment idea that man was inherently good and only needed to be free of traditional influences to reach greatness. Thus, the Jacobins were the first politicians in history to dehumanize political opponents in the name of liberty and democracy. As the Reign of Terror progressed, over 30,000 people were killed, with most being executed the same day their sentences were issued, so obviously there were no appeals in this process. Most of these executions were based on utterly flimsy standards, and victims were denied public trials and the opportunity of legal assistance. On top of executing anyone suspected of disloyalty to the Jacobins, anti-religious policies ramped up to new heights. Religion was made the scapegoat for all the problems of the Republic. Now, even priests who swore oaths of loyalty to the state were killed, and a campaign of de-Christianization was launched. Catholics and Protestants alike had their religious rights revoked. Many clergy were killed in savage ways, and churches were converted into halls of reason. The government created its own new state religion, the atheistic Cult of Reason.
Okay, here I agree with Backstube, like, trying to ban religion and killing priests was just counterproductive and immoral, and it led to nothing good. But the paradox of Jacobinism, much like the paradox of communism, is that they combined some of the most regressive ideas, like totalitarianism, let's say, and killing the priests, with some of the most progressive ideas in human history. The Jacobins actually abolished slavery in all French colonies. Like, they were pretty much 40 years more progressive than the British Empire, the second most progressive regime on earth at that time. Now, okay, if we don't count the United States, but on the issue of slavery, the Jacobins were much ahead of their time, like almost 100 years more progressive than the United States and 40 years more progressive than Great Britain. But okay, yeah, they were also kind of crazy, and sometimes being crazy can make you very progressive in some aspects. But what's also interesting, so when Napoleon decided to bring back slavery on Santo Domingo, or on Haiti, what became Haiti, the slaves then revolted. And okay, this led to a lot of chaos. This even led to black people, then starting something like a race war against the white people on the island and mixed race people. So it was chaos. But okay, in the end, the independent Republic of Haiti, won its freedom. And actually, yeah, Napoleon kind of even later said that his greatest administrative mistake was what he did on Haiti, and the French lost control of Haiti. And that defeat changed the history of the world in a very unexpected way. So it led Napoleon to conclude that it is not smart to try and control American territories, that it is too difficult because of the rebellions that occurred on Haiti as a result of him bringing back slavery. And he concluded that then he should sell all French territories in the North American continent to the United States. And in a way, the slave revolt in Haiti, according to Eric Hobsbawm, led to the beginning of the westward expansion of the United States. In a way, that rebellion resulted in United States beginning to believe that they now really have the opportunity to claim the entirety of the continent for themselves. But okay, let us continue.
As I said at the beginning of the video, there are many lessons to be learned from the French Revolution. To start with, in the lead up to the revolution, the monarchy, nobility, and clergy were failing to perform their duties effectively. This had lost them support of the poor and rich alike. Decadence and immorality should have been cracked down on rather than ignored. They should have worked harder to bring fair, just, and honorable governance to France. As for the revolutionaries, they obviously had their own problems. Many had become so mystified by Enlightenment propaganda that they lost touch with reality. They falsely believed that all they had to do to reach utopia was to purge the old world. The children of the Enlightenment took the Christian morality of the societies they lived in for granted, and when it was gone, they couldn't replace it. They allowed pseudo-intellectuals with a hatred of tradition and religion to seize control of the revolution and create a monstrous system that was far worse than what they overthrew.
So I agree that the Jacobins were pretty crazy in many aspects, but sometimes you need a crazy, let's say, dreamer, a crazy utopian thinker to proclaim some ideas that are truly much ahead of their time. Like this idea that even poor men should be allowed to vote. Back at a time that was an absurd idea. Or abolishing slavery, even in the colonies. That was an absurd idea. I mean, Napoleon's point why he then returned slavery was, how is our economy going to make money without slaves? Like Haiti was one of the most profitable colonies to have in the world. So although it's called Haiti after the revolution, like Santo Domingo was how it was called before the revolution. But yeah, my point is, sometimes you need crazy radicals to proclaim some principles. And even though their revolution failed and produced terror and pointless deaths, their ideals lived on. And people later could still remember and say, well, actually what we are doing now, like abolishing slavery and giving even poor men the right to vote, it was done before. Like, it did not maybe last for a long time, but it was done before. And Backstube here is not giving enough credit, in my humble opinion, to the Jacobins for breaking some very important taboos at the time. I mean, even Christianity at first seemed like this crazy kind of revolutionary ideology that glorifies being poor and like that hates the rich. That's how Christianity seemed to the Romans back in the day. And then that crazy ideology actually shaped the world and like broke some important Roman taboos, like this idea that Romans and barbarians should never be equal. like Christ said, no, they can be equal because they're all children of God. So my point is, yeah, ideologies can at the same time be crazy and harmful in many ways, while still in the long run changing the world for the better. Okay, if you like this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe.